continue what we are calling our Latin American Crossroads series that focuses on China's connections with Latin America. Of course, we're broadening it a little bit during the iteration to talk a little bit more universally or more broadly about Colombia and the United States, in particular, the conversation about the reshoring of investment and the changing global supply chains when it comes to the post-COVID-19 world. We have a great program for you today with Ambassador Francisco Santos Calderon, Ambassador of Colombia to the United States. But we also wanted to provide you a little bit of an introduction and some ground start. During the Q&A session, I will ask you to send your questions to Sam Bay through the chat function. Sam Bay is on the Global Atlanta staff. She will forward those questions to me, and I will make sure that we route them to the ambassador correctly. Like I said, Global Atlanta, if you don't know, if you're just joining us from another part of the world or from another part of the United States, we are a news website covering international business. We've been around since 1991, covering Atlanta, the intersection of Atlanta and the world, particularly how the global economy affects us here in our backyard. As far as we know, we're really one of the few, if not the only, publication that looks at a city's engagement with the world in this way. And we're excited to continue our discussion around Latin America with the ambassador. So the sponsor of this series has been Emory Executive Education at the Goizueta Business School, and I'm going to ask Nicola Barrett from Emory Executive Ed to give us a little bit of background on the school and the programs offered therein. Nicola?
Thanks, Trevor. My name is, as Trevor said, Nicola Barrett. I'm Chief Corporate Learning Officer with Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School. So I'm really pleased to be with you today for this Global Atlanta event focused on global supply chains in a post-pandemic world. As you may know, Global Atlanta tracks how local companies engage with the global economy and how foreign enterprises are fueling Atlanta's rise as an international business center. As a local Atlanta organization, Emory Executive Education is part of an internationally ranked business school, and we offer university-based training and professional development for high potential leaders and executives with a portfolio of online, more and more online today, and on-campus-based programs and workshops, as well as development initiatives designed specifically for organizations to help them accelerate their strategic goals. For example, Goizueta previously hosted over 100 senior leaders from Colombia for professional development focused on strategy execution to drive business results for their organization. And so with direct flights from Colombia to Atlanta, or like now in the virtual classroom, high potential leaders and executives can take part in our programs that are really focused on a range of themes, be it strategic decision-making, agile strategy execution, analytics, financial acumen, operations, leadership, influence, and much more. As we all navigate through the uncertain and murky waters of COVID-19 and the economic crisis that we're all experiencing, we're working very hard, in fact my team would say harder than ever, in helping organizations and executives develop the mindsets, the skill sets, and the tool sets so that leaders and their teams and their businesses not only survive, but remain viable and thrive as we emerge into the next normal. By being here today, you're demonstrating curiosity and a commitment to learning. And I invite you all, if you are free on Thursdays mornings at 9 a.m. to join us for our Business Over Breakfast sessions as well. They're interactive webinars featuring Goizueta faculty focused on current business issues. And this week or tomorrow, we're going to be focusing on how do you lead remote teams, which is something that probably either everybody is doing, they're either leading or they're part of a remote team. And so what we're trying to do is really bring helpful, useful information and techniques and approaches to people all over the U.S. and the world. Thank you, Trevor. I look forward to a great session.
Thank you so much, Nicola. And I have to say, just as a side note, one of the reasons I approached Emory Executive Ed as the sponsor for this series was that I was able to cover one of those training sessions with something like 100 plus Colombian executives. And I remember the statement of one of the participants being that you had, majority of Colombia's GDP in the room because you had such large major companies that are an integral part of Colombia's economy that were sending their leaders here to be trained. So I really appreciate your sponsorship. The credit for this really, though, I have to say goes to ProColombia. The local office here in Atlanta, Galindo, approached me about talking with the ambassador and with the ProColombia team. ProColombia is the investment agency that helps foreign investors come into Colombia and take advantage of its assets. So I wanted to introduce Javier Urrutia, who is going to be providing a few comments about the organization, but also he will be on the call and available, especially Q&A, to answer sector-specific questions or things about incentives or workforce, things like that are relevant to foreign investors. So Javier, why don't you provide us a few just comments about ProColombia, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Thanks, Trevor. Good morning to all. Colombia is the promotion agency from the government that focuses its efforts on three basic areas. Number one is foreign direct investment into Colombia. Number two is inbound tourism, both leisure and business tourism. And number three, support for all export efforts out of our country. We have presence in 35 countries across the globe. Basically what we provide is a suite of services with people all over the country, in all regions in the country, identifying business opportunities, projects across all sectors, public-private initiatives and public bids as well. And since we're part of the government, we have that direct access and we can channel that to interested investors across the globe. So that's basically what we do. Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll come back to you later on, Javier. In terms of the Q&A, like I mentioned, for some of those who are just joining the call now, if you want to send a question, you can do so during the entire session, during the conversation. Just send it to Sam Bay. Find Sam Bay in the chat function. Sam is on the Global Atlanta team, and she will collate and forward those questions on to me. When we get to the Q&A session, you're also welcome to chat those to her during the Q&A as well, but I just wanted to let you know we'll create a queue as we get going. And also, if everyone could just make sure to keep your video off if possible, and also mute your microphone. Most of you should have been muted automatically, but I'm hearing some car beeping and other sounds. So just make sure you've got your microphone muted and your video turned off so that we can ensure that the bandwidth stays healthy. So I'm going to introduce thank you so much, Ambassador Francisco Santos Calderon, who's with us. It is not every day that I get to interview a diplomat who's also a trained journalist, so he's going to know all of my tricks before I get started. I'm not going to read his full bio, but I think probably his most important achievement is his marriage to Maria Victoria Garcia and their 4 children. He's also a former vice president of Colombia between 2002 and 2010 under the administration of President Alvaro Uribe, and put in place many policies against corruption, extortion, kidnapping, with which he has personal experience that we may or may not talk about. I'm not sure, we'll see. He is just well versed in many segments of the peace process here in Colombia, something that we'll get into, I'm sure. And studied, I wanted to mention, studied in the United States at the University of Kansas, University of Texas, and with degrees in journalism and Latin American studies. He was also awarded as a Neiman Fellow at Harvard University, and won the Paul Harris Medal from Rotary International. So decorated in many different ways. Ambassador Santos, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Trevor, thank you. Thank you very much. I love the sound of babies. I haven't seen the naked husband or wife go behind the... Believe me, it has happened. But thank you, Global Atlanta for having this conference. Thank you to Emory University, the executive ed program. Thank you to Hernando of Colombia, to Javier, and especially thank you all for being here in what I think it's a critical moment of the world. And by the way, I am a Kansas City Chiefs fan, so we're champions. Probably will be champions for 2 years, but we don't know if there's going to be an this year. So the Atlanta, the Falcons are going to have to wait. But I love this country, and I see the huge opportunities that we have in the whole nearshoring and reshoring issue, which has become a word that 10 years wasn't there. And why?
Exactly.
Because we went from a just-in-time economy to a just-in-case economy. And that's a huge change. Value chains that were almost all of them concentrated in China and Southeast Asia have shown a huge weakness. On the one hand, because of the pandemic, and second, on this trade dispute between China and the U.S., which, as I can say, and from here in DC, it's just starting. This is a fight between two of the largest economic powers of the 21st century. And this is a fight between two alpha males. And this is something that you have Republicans and Democrats exactly looking at the same position. So this is something that's going to become an integral part of how the world economy is going to work.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting to see how that all plays out for sure, because I think many people originally thought that this was going to be isolated to the Trump administration, but I think he's pulled out some things that have gotten bipartisan consensus. But before we launch into it, I wanted to make sure I talk about the relevance of this and why we were so aggressive in trying to get you to come on. You came to Atlanta in November. You spoke to many different audiences, and it was pretty amazing to see how aggressive you were in getting out there beyond you, both in the foreign policy sector, but also into the other business sectors of Atlanta that were very strong. So you spoke to the Atlanta Council on International Relations. You spoke at a breakfast at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. You went to Georgia Tech, and you and I met at the Atlanta Tech Village, where you met with some companies. And I just wanted to, first of all, set the stage and say why were you so focused on Atlanta and the Southeast in particular? Of course, we know what was like with COVID, but even at that time, you were very aggressive about trying to establish partnerships and bring Southern companies in particular into your orbit.
I would say, and even though Miami is the capital of Latin America, Atlanta is the capital of the Southeast. And look at how many Fortune 500 companies there is. It's, I would say, in the forestry business is probably one of the number one or number two in the U.S. In terms of investment, technology, etc. It's become a fintech hub. So it plays, it's geographically, it plays a very strong relationship with the northern part of South America, which is Colombia. We're 4 hours away, thanks to Delta. And by the way, our friends of Delta, thank you for being here. And there's a company who might be for sale called Avianca, the oldest airline, the second oldest airline in the world. So just giving you a hint. And that's what's happening. What's happening, and part of the reasons I've been doing this, and I'm going to start working, and as a matter of fact, one company that we talked to, it's going to start doing investments in Colombia next semester. As a matter of fact, I had to get him into Colombia via humanitarian plane because he needed to start getting everything ready for next semester. It's a company that's going to invest. They did the studies and showed that Colombia in cashew production is the number one in terms of yield and cashew oil in the world. Its productivity is amazing. So agribusiness is another element, and Georgia and Atlanta are critical. are one of the big hubs in agribusiness in the region. So that's why Atlanta, and because we think that that's a stepping stone to getting a lot of other companies in the Southeast, which I think it's such a huge economic possibility that you can't bite more than what you can eat. So that's why.
Definitely, and your passion for the ag sector was particularly palpable when Metro Atlanta Chamber. I was at that breakfast, and I do want to get into that later on because I know we have some folks from the Georgia Department of Agriculture that are in charge of international sales in particular that are on the call. But we got so much potential, so many things we can talk about. So I wanted to start, and again, everybody keep your microphones muted. I'm hearing some background noise, so just keep that in mind as we go. But yeah, first I wanted to start. We really have, I think, two elephants in the room at this point when it comes to Colombia and the world in particular, but the world generally, but Colombia in particular. And I want to start with a general one on COVID-19. I noticed that a lot of our participants, upon registration, asked us to kind of get your sense for how things are going. Obviously, every country is responding differently. I saw that Medellin has been lauded as kind of an innovator, which it has on many fronts, but particularly with keeping the COVID-19 death rate down. But give us kind of the lay of the land with COVID-19 in Colombia right now, especially given that you're in a neighborhood that seems to be kind of the epicenter right now. Outside of the U.S., I should say.
Yeah, we've done a great job regarding COVID. We have around 70,000 cases. Our testing is way up. We have been able to flatten the curve in terms of getting it to grow slowly, but we're not at the peak yet. Our peak is going to be probably last week of July, 1st or 2nd week of August. ICUs, which have been prepared, are ready, but are getting 50 to 60% full. We haven't had to use the other elements that we have built in case that we need more ICU units. Our mortality rate is low. It's I think below 2%, which is really, really good for the amount of cases. Obviously, if there's new treatment, we closed very, very early. And I think that helped us not go from a huge peak and then to get down. The cost was brutal in terms of human life. So as you would say, we're bracing for impact. It's not going to be a soft landing, but it's not going to be a crash. So that's it, and that's what you do in terms of managing a pandemic. We're slowly opening up. That's going to increase the peak, obviously the speed, but you also need to get the economy back going. We were going so well that we were able to grow on the first trimester. Wow. Colombia grew 1.5%. It was going to grow 4.5%, but March hit us really hard. We're probably going our growth decrease this year, which is going to be all of Latin America, is going to have negative growth, probably the U.S. too. It's going to be between 2.5% and 3%, while the rest of the continent is going to be above 6%. So in the middle of a very difficult situation, we've done the best we can, and it shows what I would say are the biggest strengths of Colombia. One, democracy. It's a very strong democracy. So there's controls, there's checks and balances, and I think that's very important to have it. Second, science-based decision-making, which has been very, very important. Third, leadership from the president that has every day spoken to Colombians, telling them we're going this way. So creating the necessary understanding of the crisis. And fourth, institutionality, which is critical in helping us build our capacity to sustain a crisis and to manage a crisis that is going to hit us hard, but that I think in the middle of it, we're doing okay, which is, I think, the best you can do in the middle of this unexpected health crisis.
Have you announced any measures to kind of stimulate the economy? Have you had to resort to some of the or stimulus plans like we have in the U.S. and other countries have, or does that remain to be seen based on
No,
how it plays out?
We have stimulus packages to small industry, small and medium industry, which is the 85% of Colombia's employment. To large industry, we don't have any type of big industries. We don't have any type of because of lack of resources. We would love to have it, but we don't. And we're focusing in giving people. More than 3.5 million families are getting a check during some months, so that they can maintain, food, services, rent, and that has created obviously a difficult situation for Colombia, and I think for the whole region, is that Colombia is a very conservative country in terms of managing its economy. Colombia is the only country in Latin America that has never defaulted its debt, never. Maybe Chile is the other one, sorry, but I don't know if in the. But here we had to throw all of our conservatism out the window. We had to spend a lot more money than we have a law that allows you only to spend. We had to suspend that law to be able to get loans, etc., to increase spending precisely for the crisis. But even in terms of management, I think it shows how well it is managed economically, that the dollar went up to 4,000 to a peso, and now it's back down to 3,500. So it says and the bond stayed, etc.
Vote of confidence.
It shows that there's confidence in what we are doing, which is something you need to manage too. You cannot throw all your history out the window, because otherwise, building is very difficult. Destroying, you do it like this.
Yeah, definitely. So, you mentioned the budget issue. I know that some people are, worried that the funding of the implementation of the peace deal is kind of in jeopardy because of the budget. I wanted to ask you about that, because I think that's the other kind of elephant in the room. I know that there's been skepticism on the side of the Duque administration about the peace deal that was implemented previously under President Santos. And I want to just get your sense for that. Some publications have warned of a slow death, that there's sort of like this delaying process to try to get to a better, what is perceived under this administration as a better deal or a better situation. How do you kind of respond to that? Because I think that's going to play into confidence for investors.
No, I don't have to answer that. Kroc Institute from the University of Notre Dame can answer it. They are the ones who are doing the supervision of the implementation. They just put out the report this week of how it was being done. And they said the long-term issues, which are for 15 years, are taking a little bit more, but the short-term issues are being done very, very well. Obviously, there's going to be so it's not a slow death, it's implementation. It's implementation with a little bit of different rules, to be very sincere. So one of the rules is you need to have accountability from the other side. And I'll give you an example. During 2016, 2017, and half of 2018, they spent more than $2 billion pesos, which is around $700 million in voluntary crop substitution. Guess what happened? Illegal drugs grew 30%.
Okay, yeah.
So you have to keep in balance, but we're fully committed to the implementation, but with accountability that you have to also comply with what you sign. The members of the FARC, even I dislike it, they're in Congress, and I'm opposed to that, but they're in Congress. They're a political party. They're in there. They're doing politics. They didn't have to go through vote like the rest of Colombia. They got that in the peace process, etc. So the development plans of the regions are going in the right direction. Is it gonna fight for crucial money? Yes. We're in a different situation. Mm-hmm. For heaven's sake, we have a pandemic.
Yeah.
We have 50 million people at risk. We have an unemployment of 25%. 5 million people are now unemployed. obviously you need to also take care of them, and not just of the 5,000 or 10,000 members of the FARC. So yes, there's somewhat a dispute, but it's normal. If we didn't have this pandemic, we wouldn't have to make this question. Is it going to delay the implementation? No. We're most of the hard ticket items that are necessary to have members of the FARC integrated to society, etc., are moving along. The others are taking longer.
Yeah, I think from what I've read, and again, I'm no expert on this. We have a lot of people on this call that know a lot more about this process than I do. And I don't want to hijack the conversation to talk just about this, but I think most people are more worried about the ELN than the FARC and some of the violence that's happened. But I wanted to frame it in an investment direction, like especially when you're talking about cashews, and you're very you had some big investments in avocado growing and everything, and in terms of crop substitution for coca and even coffee. I think some farmers are trying to get to different crops besides coffee. How secure are the areas in which you're trying to attract people to invest in these massive farms? Because you've talked about how Colombia's one of its big advantages is the arable land that's available.
Look, security has become a secondary issue now. Is there crime? Yeah, like there's in Baltimore.
Oh, I think you froze for a second there. Might have to wait a moment. Javier, while the ambassador is getting back on, are you still available to chat?
I'm here.
I think we lost Trevor. Trevor is stuck in mine. Are you okay? Whoops.
I'm here. Ambassador, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think we lost Trevor. That's what happened.
That's okay. We hear the two important speakers, so that's good.
Okay.
Carry on.
Hi, this is Sam. I just want to say that Trevor will be back. He had a little bit of an issue with his Wi-Fi before we started, so he probably is just getting it sorted now. So just
all right.
So let me talk, especially since this is an investment summit, which is very important for us, about what's happening. Look, this decoupling of the economies is a reality. And a reality, as I said before, that happens because of how the world is moving. And Colombia can play a great role in this nearshoring issue. Look, I was reading an article on how Germany, France, the Netherlands are looking at Northern Africa for a nearshoring experience of many of their companies that were only based in China. So you're going to see the next 20, 30 years, you're going to see regional globalization. What we had was world globalization. That's going to still be there for some elements, obviously, but I think there's going to be a more emphasis on regional. And by the regional, I mean, in the case of the U.S. and Colombia, the Americas. So as I said in another speech, let's make the Americas great again. All of us, from Canada to Argentina. And it's a great opportunity, and it's a great opportunity, and Colombia can play a really big role. Look, we are 4 days by boat, by ship from Miami, 7 days from New York, 7 days from Rio de Janeiro, 8 days, 7 days from Santiago, and 8 days from Los Angeles. So imagine how Colombia can become, and most of those countries in the region, we have free trade agreements. So what happened with a company that I visited, and I think I told you this, Trevor, with Home Depot, they are looking to new sources of resourcing some of the goods they provide here in the U.S. And those are the opportunities, and that's what's going to happen. And I think Atlanta and the companies in Atlanta can play a very, very, very big role. And that's why we're working with the city of Atlanta. That's why we're working with the governor's office, especially the Secretary of Agriculture. That's why I went to Atlanta, and that's why we have this forum, to see what opportunities we can have together. And when I said at the beginning, look, there's Avianca, it's true. one of the biggest connections to the world we have is Delta.
Yeah.
You go through Delta to the rest of the state, you go through Delta practically to the rest of the world. So I'm not, it's part of becoming a player in the value chain of
right.
companies that have their base in Atlanta or in the southeast of the U.S. And especially, as you said, agriculture, because Colombia is the last agricultural frontier in the Western Hemisphere, the last. We don't have to take down one tree, and we have 50 million hectares. There's 100 million acres of land to be developed in Colombia. That's the only land left in the Western Hemisphere. You want more? You have to take Amazon jungle. We don't. You have more? You have to take destroy other types of pristine environments. Colombia doesn't have to do that, and so Atlanta and Georgia and the Southeast can become a great ensemble with Colombian companies for something like that.
Well, I know that, and sorry for dropping off there. I guess my internet got disconnected for a second. I wasn't worried about you filling the space, though.
Trevor, you have to pay the bill.
That's right. So I was wondering, you mentioned agricultural and complementarity. I mean, I guess you addressed the security question while I was gone, but for instance, like Peru, I've found it very interesting to see what they've done in terms of, farmers or growers going down to plant crops that cannot grow in a certain time of year, because we're in different hemispheres. So the seasons are different, the growing seasons are different. And that way you can sort of have these crops all year round and not have to kind of have interruptions. But that's, I would assume that argument plays in Colombia as well, although you're a little bit further north. You mentioned making the Americas great again. I really like that. The Atlanta, just by way of background, tried to become the Secretariat of the Free Trade Area of the Americas, which was a doomed effort to try to integrate everybody in the hemisphere under one trade deal. But the legacy of that has been consulates like the Colombian consulate in Atlanta and Delta's links throughout the region. So we're certainly attuned to that, and that's really one of the impetuses behind this forum, is that we feel like Atlanta's more of a Latin American hub than it lets on. So I wanted to ask you about the integration side. Colombia is part of the Pacific Alliance, which is 4 countries: Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile, that have sort of started some integration around trade and investment. But is that continuing on unabated, especially amid the pandemic, or is there some kind of fracturing of that alliance at this moment? Because I think that'll play, especially to giving more of an argument to bring some of these companies back from Asia if you have a broader market in the region as well.
It's really interesting because the Alliance of the Pacific, which is Chile, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, has gotten so much attention. It's working very well. We're integrating even more. Mexico, with the change of government, has started a little bit looking more inward, but they'll come on board. But I think that's the other strategic element of what we're talking about. You can have a supply chain all over the Pacific coast of Latin America. How a company, a chemical company, for example, which is for specialized chemicals, we're looking to put them on board in Colombia, and we're working especially with a couple of regions in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, so that we can have both East Coast and West Coast of the U.S. You could have a produce to integrate those countries into a value chain. So it's another advantage of why Colombia can become a strategic ally, such as we are today in terms of security, in terms of international relations for many decades. 2 countries have the most operational integration with the U.S. Armed Forces in the world, Israel and Colombia. And that's how big is our integration. That's how, that just to tell you that we have such a big alliance that it's absolutely necessary to move forward. And you said, Trevor, something very important. Atlanta should play a big role in becoming the capital of Latin America. Why Miami? You're so close, and you provide such a big. You're closer to the center of the U.S. You're closer to most markets. So I think it's a two-way street, and I think Atlanta can play a big role there. That's another reason why I went to Atlanta and to talk about this commercial and economic possibilities.
Definitely. And, you know, we talked earlier about China. You kind of brought that question up. When we spoke in Atlanta, you mentioned it as a technological Cold War. I think maybe it's even gotten a little bit colder and gone beyond technology at this point. But here in Atlanta, there was a convening of the the AmChams from all over Latin America, and there were some administration officials here speaking, and to me, it seemed like their big push was to try to discourage Latin American economies from accepting Chinese infrastructure investment that may be tied to usurious debt potentially, or even accepting technologies like Huawei in the implementation of 5G. So it sort of seemed to validate your thesis that this was an enduring trend. But China's also a major Colombian trading partner, and infrastructure is a big deal in Colombia. You have to navigate mountainous terrain. You've got two oceans on either side that you need to connect better. Aviation, as you said, is very important because of the times that it takes to travel through the mountains. So how do you kind of straddle this middle ground? And I mean, give us a more geopolitical kind of scenario where or an approach that maybe other countries would learn from in terms of being a strong defense trading ally of the U.S., but also remaining open to opportunities.
To a certain extent, the same way that the U.S. does. It's a great market. It's a very important market. Actually, when you look at Latin America or at South America, China is Brazil's #1 trading partner, Argentina's #1 trading partner, Chile's #1 trading partner, Peru's #1 trading partner, Uruguay's #1 trading partner. It's not Colombia's #1 trading partner.
Right.
The #1 trading partner is the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And it says a lot. It says a lot. They have done great investments in Colombia. They just won in an open bid, not Belt and Road, in an open bid, the building of the first line of the subway. For 2 years, I have been telling the American companies, come on, start bidding again in infrastructure projects in Latin America and in Colombia. The U.S. left that market a long time ago. And we're trying to lure them in because you're great builders. You build great bridges. You build great infrastructure. So we're trying to get them back in. But in the meantime, those infrastructures need to be built. And as long as it's an open bid, which absolute compliance of transparency, and as a matter of fact, that bid was being overseen by the World Bank. Hey, whomever wins it, wins it. So I think it's also, the U.S. also has to play a big role in terms of this. And they have moved in that direction. I think two things are happening right now. One is the nomination of an American for the Inter-American Development Bank. I think that's going to play a big role in terms of this geostrategic competition that is happening, and it's going to continue. And the second is the Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, which used to be OPIC. It turned into DFC. Congress gave them $60 billion to start putting equity financing in companies that invest in the region and that counterbalance, let's say, Chinese investment. That's the main reason why the DFC was built. So the U.S. is waking up to this, but it's not only the U.S. government that has to wake up to this, it's U.S. companies. I was looking at the other day a conference about Japan. Japan is disinvesting very quickly. Japan is moving a lot of its companies, American Japanese companies, to Singapore, to Indonesia, to Vietnam, reinforcing, also doing reshoring in Japan, in Mexico. So this is something that is already happening, whether we like it or not. How do we deal with China? As good neighbors, as good partners of the international community. But obviously, we have an alliance with the U.S. Obviously, we have a historic alliance with the U.S. Obviously, we have common values, but China is an integral part of the world. It's something that's going to exist. It's a great market, and we have to respect it and work with them too, with a framework of laws, institutionality, rule of law, etc. As Colombia is, and as a democracy like Colombia, as strong as it is, does things.
Yeah, I think that's the danger, is that it's being kind of framed as an either or, and I think that framework of staying open with the democratic and institutional framework is going to be.
Let me tell you something, Trevor. There's going to be some either or in technology. I think I said this, and I foresee a country with two platforms, a world with two platforms. Like we had, you remember that time when we had VHS and Betamax? That's going to come in terms of technology.
Vaguely.
With bridges that you can jump from one technology or the other. But I see two very different. It's already happening. Look at the WhatsApp, the Chinese WhatsApp, which is a lot more sophisticated than WhatsApp. Weibo, I don't remember. So you're starting to have Amazon, Alibaba. It's already happening. So that's not something that I'm just inventing or something that it comes out of my of an idea. It's already there.
What about and I'll kind of combine two questions. So, as you mentioned, there are a lot of countries in Asia that are seeing an influx of new investment as people try to, as the U.S. decouples, but also other countries like Japan. Japan's even trying to incentivize some of its companies to leave with actual money to come back to Japan. But so how do you compete with these other Asian powers? These places where obviously the labor is going to be cheap, but the logistics are going to be a little bit more challenging potentially. How do you compete? And then can you give us kind of a background of infrastructure and what's going on in Colombia right now? I think people would be interested in that.
Yeah, the first thing is specializing. You can't bite more than you can chew. So I guess what Colombia wants to do is fintech services. I would say space parts and space and aeronautical industry, the car industry, chemicals, apparel, forestry, food. That's a lot. And I certainly would want if Colombia could chew a little bit of the technology industry. If we could remember that Costa Rica used to have an Intel plant. And when that Intel plant went to China, the ecosystem that it left behind, still alive today, and it still has made Costa Rica a really interesting hub for technology. So I think even though we might not be the best place for various reasons, we might not be as competitive as Vietnam or as Indonesia or as with this type of, I would say,
low cost,
technological Cold War, we can start buying some of that. I would love to get Foxconn here in Colombia and to start, if you start building, even assembling. And when you look at how China moved, China started assembling. China, the first big company in China was Motorola. And guess what they started building? Beepers. Assembling beepers. When beepers were moving out of, and look where they've gone. So you have to be very strategic to what companies you go for. But I certainly think that if we're able to chew on and we're able to get a technology company to assemble, we will be able to build a technology hub. We compete with labor costs, which are not as cheap, but very productive and really reliable. We compete with stable, the number 9 energy grid in the world in terms of stability is Colombia, number 9. And that's critical for those companies. We compete with access. Barranquilla, our northern coast, as I said to you, is 4 days from Florida and 6 days or 7 days from New York. We compete with the number, I think in Latin America, according to doing business, we're the number 1 managerial class in the region. And I think it's the number one or the number two technical expertise with a great, so we have the tools. We have the tools. We need is to do what I'm doing, this type of meetings, pushing, going after businesses, going with laser, not shooting with a shotgun, but with laser. And look, this company might come here, and this is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and it looks like at least, especially in the first quarter, you've been very successful. You still had Colombia can correct me, but you still had record numbers of investment in terms of growth from the previous year. Also, you know, there's, I think you may have shortchanged Colombia a bit. I think you're a bit beyond assembling deeper. So you've got a lot of segments that are extremely competitive, like metalworking and like you said, the apparel, fashion. So can you talk about some of those sectors? I mean, I know we've got Javier to address specifics, but you know, as we get into the Q&A, I want to remind people, I think the problem, there was a problem with the chat. If you want to send the chat to Sam Bay of our staff and she can forward to me, or if time is of the essence, you can just send it to me. But we had a malfunction on the chat earlier, so I think maybe people were not able to send the chats. But speak to the sectors, and then we'll go into the specifics in the Q&A.
If somebody wants to do a question, just light up and turn your
free for all. No, I think Javier will call out some people in the Colombia team if we need it. So,
but I'll be here.
What with Javier and with Colombia, what we're doing is really setting up the aircraft carrier so that we can land many businesses in Colombia. I told you about the cashew, and this cashew company, which is certainly from Atlanta, their plan is to have 10,000 hectares of cashew very quickly. That would be the biggest cashew individual cultivation in the world. The competitive advantage of the production down there is so big that it's not only possible, it's going to be done. In California, and let's talk agribusiness. I went to the PMA meeting, which this year I think is going to be in Dallas. It was in Los Angeles. We have so many companies going to Colombia, not to look to invest, because as I said, we're the last agricultural frontier. We have a pilot project that was put on hold because of COVID. That's going to start with 300 acres, 700 acres, a pilot project of blueberries. And Peru doesn't have full year production, Colombia does. Peru misses the equator by very little, but it doesn't have full year, Colombia has. The altitude in Colombia creates a productivity of certain products that I have no doubt that in the next 10 years, Colombia is going to be the number 2 or number 3 producer of blueberries and of strawberries in the continent, after the U.S. obviously. So forestry is amazing what we can do, and as a matter of fact, President Duque wants to have ready 7 million hectares, which is 14 million acres of forestry ready for businesses to go and plant and start developing them. So if you're in the forestry business, you have to have people in Colombia now looking at where, how, because that's going to happen. It might not happen this year, but in the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to happen. So for ag, anybody who wants to be in the game has to look at Colombia, which is it's ready for not only for business, being probably the most business-friendly country in Latin America, and I didn't say that. The vice president for international content of Discovery told me, he said, look, we had our hub, we were looking for our hub, but we had problems here and here and here and here and here and here, and the only country where you can do business very easily is Colombia. So So I think that's another reason why it's so important to have this type of event, so that you can understand and know what Colombia is all about and how companies from the region can profit from it.
Trevor,
Javier, did
two quick
mention
notes
a few
on what
specifics?
Ambassador Santos is saying is, number one, on the forestry side, your own experts in Georgia have analyzed the potential production cycle in Colombia, which is 3 to 4 years shorter than in Georgia, which if you put that into a business model, it changes completely the dynamics. So that's something to consider. On what you were asking in terms of bidding and tenders, and from all over the world, people investing in Colombia, as not as many U.S. corporations. We have started this year a series of webinars with the DOC, inviting companies, U.S. companies, to see firsthand all the projects and tenders and public-private initiatives that we're putting out for them to assess and hopefully to invest. So I want to make just two comments.
Yeah, would you potentially rattle off 4 or 5 sectors where you're really keen to attract new investors and maybe some of the incentives that Colombia offers?
Yeah, I think what Ambassador Santos was saying is that what we've been doing is we've been mapping with the regions where our strengths hold. So our geographics are not easy, as you were pointing out earlier, Trevor. And so we see that the interior part of the country, where you see Bogota, Medellin, and in some degree Barranquilla, but basically Bogota, Medellin are very strong in services, IT, software, BPOs, KPOs, all that. So very strong, a lot of incentives. That's one of the key area. And also the orange economy, creative industries support as well. Very close to the government and a lot of incentives. In terms of facilities, production facilities, I would say construction materials, electronic components, electrical components, hard parts manufacturing for auto industry and aeronautics, construction materials, I think I've said it already, and chemicals, specialty chemicals, and plastics. I think those are the 5 key areas. And we've been working with the regions which have ports, Pacific ports or the Atlantic Caribbean ports, because we believe that since you don't have that long infrastructure, painful ride from the interior to the coastal areas, but you use that coastal proximity to the ports, there we have an advantage. And I think also things will change. This supply disruption event that we've been living in the last months, I think will make companies think about having smaller tactical production units for regional supply more than the huge production facilities, thinking about moving away from one region to the other one, which is what Ambassador was saying, just tactical production units for regional supply. Being Colombia close to any ports in the South American region, Caribbean, Central America, or even North America, puts us in a very ideal position. In those 5 sectors I've mentioned, where we have enough private companies that can guarantee raw material supply. That's basically my answer.
Well, I think that's interesting because you have a strong aviation sector, which is important for these quick movements, and you also have so this kind of macro trend with the development of new manufacturing technologies where prototyping is easier and you can do smaller runs potentially with 3D printing and things like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting discussions to have. I want to get back to you on potentially medical because that seems to be one of the most sensitive areas, and wanted to see if there's any potential there. But also we have a question from the audience. We had someone who is, I think his name's Ken Keene. Yes, Ken has served in the U.S. Embassy in Bogota as military group commander between 2001 and 2003. So it looks like it overlapped with Ambassador's time as VP as well. But his comment meanders about security and the close relationships between the U.S. and Colombia. But the core of the question is he's a faculty member at the U.S Business School and wants to take some of his students to Colombia in January 2021, obviously assuming we can all travel again. So he wants to know what your advice is, Ambassador, as we plan the trip for the MBA students to learn from visiting these companies, businesses, government, non-government leaders.
Wow. I would go to Medellin so they could see Ruta N and see what's happening in Medellin, that I think in innovation and in tech, which I think is very important. I would go to Barranquilla and we could arrange it to see 3 or 4 companies, Tecnoglass, etc., and how they are making inroads into the Colombian market, into the American market through Colombia. And obviously, the biggest market is Bogota, and we can arrange a visit to some of the biggest companies, business entrepreneurs, and high-minded political leaders that can really challenge them to whatever their objectives are in a trip like that. Please write me as soon as possible. We can help you start building that. It takes at least 6 months to 8 months to get it done, but we can help you really have a great visit. Obviously, Bogota has some great party places, which I know is also a very important element of that visit. And we'll arrange for that part of the visit too. My good old friend Javier Urrutia knows all of them. He's an expert.
I also had a question.
You're giving me too much credit, Ambassador, too much credit. But we do have a destination tourism agency that focuses only on MBA touring into Colombia. So I'll send you the information, Trevor, so you can share it. And they're experts. They've done it with MBAs from Texas, from New York, from all the Ivy League schools. So and they're experts. So they know how to build an agenda, including the party side as well.
Perfect. We had another question from Mark Pearson, who's asking if there's a company, I don't know if he's saying if or there definitely is, interested in investing in or acquiring IT staffing and software companies who can help them with such introductions. Wondered maybe Javier, that might be appropriate for you.
Sure, we have a system whereby we let's say we have like a classified type information that we share with regions and companies. So if he can send me his wish list on what specific targets he has in mind, if it's fintech or if it's IT, if it's software, if it's BPO, and the ticket size of investment, we can surely help.
Great. Well, yeah, and I should go ahead, Investor.
He wants to have a Zoom meeting with all of us in the embassy and all so he can get the commercial, the political, all the information. We more than gladly will do it with them.
Yeah, definitely good to know. And I think, Ambassador, you had your eyes sort of opened here in Atlanta about the potential in fintech. I think not everybody knows still what Atlanta has to offer in that regard. So I think there's a lot of overlap there with what Colombia is trying to do. I'm trying to get in as many questions as possible because we're coming up on our time. The big question everybody wants to know is when, this is from Rafael Maldonado, who I know has a strong interest in this question, but he wants to know about international flights. When are we going to see them reopen potentially? Will they stay open? Is it going to depend on what happens?
International flights, 1st of September.
1st of September. It's happening. Okay, you heard it here. He's particularly Cartagena, and I am too. I've been to Colombia once, but I didn't make it to Cartagena, so I'll have to go back for sure.
Hey, let me make a little bit of a publicity stunt. You guys have to go to Colombia, #1 biodiversity country in the world.
Let's make this your closing statement, your closing argument, because we're going to run up against our 1 hour. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Javier. Thank you for Global Atlanta. Look, Colombia is a very unknown country. It's a jewel. It's resilient. It has been a democracy, the second oldest democracy in the region after the U.S. In Colombia, when we used to have violence, we open democracy. We don't go the other way. Authority, conservative, open for business, open for vacation. Beautiful colonial city, Cartagena. Fantastic in the highlands. You have all the weather, and you have the most amazing people. And we certainly want your investment. We're open for business. In this nearshoring and rearshoring world that we're going to have, Colombia is the best destination. And I know you will go there and you will immediately start looking for investment. So don't miss this opportunity, and we will be working pro Colombia. Our office in Atlanta can work with you to arrange a Zoom conference with the ambassador and whomever you want, or a visit to Colombia, and we will be ready to work with you.
Great. And everybody that's registered, I'm going to send out Javier's contact information and potentially some information from ProColombia as well, and also to Emory, U.S School. Some of you have indicated contact you, but we will not, if you have not indicated that, of course, we're not going to forward your contact information. We're going to keep that private, but we will offer you Javier's contact info, and so that you can be sure to take advantage of these opportunities. Ambassador, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope to see you in person again in Atlanta, or perhaps in Washington or Bogota soon. And
thank you, Nicola, from Emory University. Really, thanks. That's a great school.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And I appreciate everyone participating. We hope to see you at our next event, and we will end it here. Thank you. Adios.
Adios.